Next up, I'd like to invite Luke McCormack to join the program. Our next panel will be on security challenges in the hybrid cloud environment, moderated by my old friend, Luke McCormack. Welcome to the podium, Luke, our virtual podium. Many of us know who you are. For those who don't, let me just say real quickly, Luke is a tremendous advocate and evangelist for government IT modernization, both in government and outside of government. As a former leader with extensive IT management experience, you served as a CIO for Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Justice, and prior to that, in a variety of positions at Department of Homeland Security. You also served as Vice Chairman of the Federal CIO Council, and you played a leadership role in government IT management policy development. And now, as a private citizen, Luke McCormack, you continue that good work, and I'm delighted to walk with you shoulder to shoulder in this mission. How are you doing, Luke?
I'm doing outstanding. Can everyone hear me? Can you hear me?
Oh yes, yeah, we can hear you.
Fantastic.
Yep, we're going to be bringing our operator. We'll start bringing the other panelists online, but as we did earlier, we thought it'd be engaging and fun to try a few poll questions at this point to see who's listening. And
I love it. I love it. Let's do it.
All right, operator, can you bring us a poll?
Okay, we got one.
Okay.
According to McAfee, most organizations think they use about 35 cloud services, but in reality, the number is closer to X. 120, 50, 2,000, 3,000.
Wow, pretty big spread there.
This might be a trick question, Chris.
Tricky for some, but I bet you know the answer.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
Okay, well, let's give folks a few more seconds here. And Kate, whenever you've got a consensus, go ahead and let's survey says. Wow.
Wow.
120, which sounds like a lot compared to 35. But Luke, what do you?
We're going to hold that in suspense because we have actually someone from McAfee that's going to talk about that. So
clever. Okay.
Sorry, gang, but we're going to hold that one over. All right, let's go to the next one.
Next question.
All right, what are the top security challenges associated with hybrid cloud? Pick 3, and I'm not going to list all those. You all can see them. I'll be most interested to hear the answers to this. And while they're doing that, I thought the answers to the other ones were really interesting. 38% one private cloud for a definition of hybrid, et cetera. So do we have the answer?
Well, Luke, I think we've had our first technical glitch of the day. We can seem to only be able to put one answer in. So I ask everyone, make it important, the number one answer. So
yeah, well, actually, that's okay too. That'll be interesting to see how that works out. The beauty of Zoom and learning how to do it, right?
Amen.
Yeah,
it's fun to play with these new toys. We'll get it right.
Yeah, well, now this will be some interesting feedback.
Okay, I'm told we still have answers coming in.
Okay, all right. Well, while that's happening, I thought it was interesting some of the poll results from last time. 32% thought security risk in this type of environment was the thing they wanted to hear about the most. And I know they heard a lot about that earlier, and they'll certainly hear a lot about that in our panel. And 30% say challenges in migrating apps and other functions to the cloud, which is a big deal, right?
Talked a little about that too. Yep.
Sure. I thought that was a very hearty conversation there. Grant really laid the framework and the foundation down as far as where we are with the ecosystem, policy, risk management, compliance, and agencies must modernize.
All right, Luke, word just came in. We're ready to show our answers.
All right, let's do it.
There we go. Top answer out of our
data management, data ownership, leakage. Wow, that's interesting.
A lot of concerns about data out there.
Yeah, a lot of, okay, fantastic.
All right.
Well, let me let us bring the panel members online.
All right.
And while we're doing that, I just want to say one thing right up front to everybody out there on this wire, to all the partners, and particularly all the federal service employees. I just want to say thank you for everything you've done, everything you're doing, everything you're going to do. I know it's tough out there. I know it's hard. A lot of you working 7 days a week, and you're doing an absolutely brilliant and masterful job of keeping this country safe. And I'm certainly proud of every single one of you.
Amen.
So with that, do we have all of our, yes, we do. All right.
Luke, I'm going to log off at this point. Take it away.
See you later there, old friend. All right, let me start by introducing Mr. Brian Gattoni, Chief Technology Officer, Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, AKA CISA, Department of Homeland Security. He's responsible for the technical vision and strategic alignment of CISA's data and mission services to manage risks to federal networks and critical infrastructure. Mr. Gattoni was named the DHS System Engineer of the Year in 2015. Prior to joining DHS, Brian held positions at CISA and the U.S. Army. Welcome, Brian. Mr. Ned Miller, Chief Technology Officer, Public Sector McAfee. Ned is a recognized subject matter expert on cybersecurity and is, in his current role, advises government customers on securing environments from device to cloud. Very timely. Ned is an active member of the NIST Security and Cloud Standards Working Group and the co-inventor of a series of next generation security patents. Welcome, Ned. Mr. Dan Prieto, Strategic Executive Public Sector, Google Cloud. Dan is a seasoned IT executive and a recognized national security and cybersecurity expert. He has a long track record of leadership on technology policy in the government, private sector, and with leading universities and think tanks. He has served in a number of senior positions at the White House, the Department of Defense, and on Capitol Hill. Welcome, Dan. Mr. Neal Ziring, Technical Director, Cybersecurity Director at National Security Agency. Mr. Ziring is responsible for setting the technical direction across many parts of the cybersecurity mission space. He has previously held positions, leadership positions at NSA in the Capabilities Directorate and Information Assurance Directorate. He has a great deal of experience on cloud computing, data access controls, and cyber defense. Welcome, Neal. And I think this is a perfect way to lead it off. Neal, we had a lot of conversation in the prior panel. Perhaps you were plugged in on that and talking about hybrid cloud, definitions of hybrid cloud, et cetera, et cetera. And I would be very curious, and I think the audience would be as well, to get your perspective on, what is a definition in regards to NSA's perspective, maybe even broader, the IC community at large, their perspective on what is the definition of hybrid cloud, and does it even matter?
Well, I think it definitely does matter because it affects everything you do in a cloud environment. The definition that we use, and I think it's pretty common, is hybrid cloud is a heterogeneous environment where you have integration of services and mission systems spread across on-premise systems and one or more cloud-hosted, multi-tenant cloud-hosted platforms. And that's the key. The fact that it's spread across both those types of infrastructures can make it very challenging.
Fantastic. I often hear a sort of a pendulum of definitions in regards to the various notions in regards to what a cloud definition should be, and then what a hybrid cloud definition should be. Dan, any thoughts on that?
I agree with the definition. I think the challenge from a management and security perspective in hybrid and multi-cloud environments is the heterogeneity of the environment. I mean, you come from a history where you really focused on managing one network, you focused on on-prem resources, and now with the introduction of cloud, you're having to manage across multiple heterogeneous environments. And the model historically of security was really focused on that enterprise network. And when we thought about cloud, the dominant philosophy was still sort of network and location based, such that to get access to the cloud, you would basically back through the enterprise network and then go back out to the cloud. And you see that in a number of the policies. Even though the policies are changing, there's still a focus on access via the network. There's a focus on hardware-based perimeter controls in that network. There's a focus on VPNing into that network to get out of the cloud. But as we move forward, I think it's Gartner says that, in the next couple of years, 75% of all organizations will exist in this environment on multiple cloud providers that Neal describes. And if that's true, the challenge for both practitioners and policymakers is how do you make it easier to manage in this heterogeneous environment? Because simply by adding environments, I think most security professionals and IT professionals feel overwhelmed. It's just another thing to manage. It's more overhead, more complexity. So how do we simplify that to ensure consistent policy enforcement, consistent configuration, and holistic security plans that are sort of escaped the gravity of the very historic backward-looking network focus and location focus?
So you mentioned policy, and that's something that Grant started off with. Where do you think we are in the policy landscape? I know you spent a lot of time at the White House dealing with this, probably in the think tanks as well. Do we have all the policy figured out? Is there more that's needed? Do we need less?
Well, I think there's more that's needed. I would say we're early to mid stages of a journey. Over the last couple of years, since the OPM breach, there's been a raft of new policy. OMB A130 revisions came out in 2016, executive orders on federal cybersecurity and cybersecurity workforce in 2017 and 2019, cloud smart policies and strategy in 2019, TIC policy updates. NIST is looking at zero trust architectures. This year, CISA itself has issued draft and interim TIC 3.0 guidance. There is a raft of new policy. And when I think about that policy, the things that concern me are the lag between policy and sort of leading edge technologies, number one, the lag between policy and how it is implemented and embedded in the DNA of practitioners. And also, part of the reason that I think we're still midstream is that there is still this continued dominant overhang that contains a perimeter-centric philosophy when it comes to security. In practice, the dominant philosophy still says, your network origination determines what you have access to. The TIC and CAP policies, while beginning to change, still have this focus on hardware-based sort of perimeters and CAP and TIC points. And there's still a focus on dedicated GovCloud data centers and GovCloud regions, which again stem from that historic philosophy. When you look at what happened with COVID in a number of examples, the focus on getting telework access, it was a real surge on routers and switches to up network capacity, and also a real quick ramp on VPN. And while there were a lot of successes there, I think the real question when it comes to policy and practice is how do we get from there to a future that really is zero trust? By 2023, Gartner says that 60% of enterprises will phase out most of their VPNs and favor a zero trust network access approach. But there is still a fair amount of way to get there. So I think more policy is needed. And I think the focus areas of policy shifts from now going forward, again, should focus on really making this break from the past perimeter philosophy to one that is more focused on user granularity and data granularity, focused on user access and data access, as opposed to being network and perimeter centric. I think the second policy focus should be to continue to make changes that enable practitioners to fully integrate and analyze cyber telemetry at scale so that they can gain end-to-end situational awareness across both federal civilian environments and defense environments. And finally, policies that really promote and ensure consistent management and visibility across these heterogeneous environments in ways that leverage sort of application development platforms and control planes that are optimized for hybrid multi-cloud environments where you can build once and deploy and manage anywhere. So those are some quick thoughts.
Yeah, and I always observe that, I thought OMB and Margie in particular and that team there has done a brilliant job of really laying down some policy, and then of course the all-important guidance behind that to have it implemented. But a lot of times there's still these blue laws in the agencies, right, that are not really rooted on policy. but there's, these internal sort of cultural dynamics to move away from, in this case, sort of the guards, gates, and locks kind of mentality into an environment like this. I think some of this technology lends itself to sort of break that free. But you certainly have teed up the next set of questions here, and I'll ask Brian. With this emerging federal hybrid ecosystem rapidly growing, this threat surface has kind of gotten wider. It's gotten more complex. There was a goal at one point to say, hey, we're going to simplify here. We're going to be able to secure these environments in this sort of modern type of capability. And all of a sudden we recognize that, there's a lot of threat vectors down there. There's a lot of surface issues that attack surfaces, let's say, and a lot of new instrumentation that has to be put in place. And I know you've been very busy on that. So why don't you give us some highlights on the types of things that you all are doing, are thinking about doing, going to do, have done?
Glad to, and Dan had a great lead in there because that visibility challenge will only continue to grow, and that's at the heart of what fuels CISA's contribution to the protection of the .gov is maintaining visibility from a global perspective, so we can share insights from our analysts and our partnership with folks on this screen and folks on the call and say, here's what we see happening, here's what needs to be done about it for those affected. For those that aren't affected yet or don't know, give them guidance to go find out if they are. From a CIO governance perspective, a lot of the work we're doing with the TIC 3.0 program is to set flexible guidance for those individual departments and agencies, the CIOs, to do what they need to do for their mission and their IT modernization, but maintain some standards on the security settings, maintaining some standards on the level of visibility necessary and what they have to do to protect themselves and support their own risk posture. We've seen it with the advancement of the use cases that are going into the TIC 3.0 work. We had the COVID situation cause us to leapfrog into the telework guidance and put out that interim guidance to say, even though we weren't quite planning on issuing that guidance right at that time, what's the best information we can get from the efforts we have underway to give CIOs the maximum flexibility they need to make risk decisions for their organizations? Is it relax the VPN requirements? Is it buy more, scale? How do they do that? So giving folks that baseboard of information with the support of OPM, working across the CIO and CISO councils to get common information out, I think helps everybody at least feel comfortable that even if they are subject to some of those blue laws, maybe it's time to start getting them off the books. They can do so with the confidence that they'll be supported by guidance from above.
What kind of feedback have you gotten in regards to, as you're sort of laying the tracks down and trying to roll that stuff out?
The feedback we get, being rolled into TIC 3.0 use cases is part of a deliberative process to get to a final state of that information. And the feedback is as varied as the community is in their implementations of all these technologies. You have the folks that have been really far advanced in terms of their pilots and supporting the larger initiatives that have data-driven decisions they can add back into feedback. And then you have others that are asking for more information to help them make impending decisions that they may not be ready for. So it's as varied as the community that's participating in it, but I think they're all getting the same benefits that we desired when it came to the pilot process of have somebody, lead the vanguard, take a couple of these emerging technologies, stabilize their mission with it, and then put the lessons learned back to the community for incorporation in the guidance.
Sure. Any of the other panel members want to comment on that?
Quick thought, in addition to the attempt to evolve sort of perimeter-based policies and the TIC policies on the federal civilian side, you see similar moves inside the Department of Defense as they think about their cloud access point policies. And you also see innovation. I mean, happily, Google recently won some work with the Defense Innovation Unit to really focus on some of the things that we talked about, providing with our Anthos capabilities a platform for application modernization, as well as providing a control plane for consistent cross-environment deployment, configuration management, and policy enforcement, and also an opportunity to innovate sort of software-only equivalents to the CAP as defined control points that are much more nimble and agile than more hardware-based ones. It's
really an emerging sort of, capability and journey that we're on. And you know, I love that thought. I wrote it down here. Leverage the innovation, not the technology. Thought that was a nice, catchy phrase there, and really apropos, right? I mean, this innovation is changing rapidly, and we need to make sure that we're laying some policy down and laying some instrumentation down that is going to allow the adoption of this capability and do it in as relatively seamless way as possible. Ned, let me ask you, you're sort of right in the heart of it and trying to provide solutions and capabilities to protect this, this sort of ecosystem, if you will. And somebody brought up zero trust earlier, and I thought that was very much on point. I think it was Dan. You know, we're on this journey to try to protect these environments, to instrument this capability so that we can see these vulnerabilities, understand what this attack surface is. Grant brought up the focus on the data, and then, you know, who's on the network type thing, right, which is super important. And all these roads sort of lead to this sort of zero trust nirvana, if you will. Can you give us a definition of, from your perspective, in your organization's perspective, or your sort of community's perspective on, you know, what defines zero trust, and then what does it take to get to that point? And then is that the answer?
Sure, Luke, thank you. A couple things about zero trust. As many of the folks on the phone know and the panelists, zero trust has been around for quite some time. It's not a new concept. DoD came out with it. I think our friends at Forrester coined the term a little over a decade ago. NIST has recently taken an attempt at defining it for the federal government, and I think that it is, in concept, an architectural approach. So the good part of zero trust is it requires an organization to evaluate their existing architecture and look at it from the zero trust lens at all parts of access control, all the way through device to cloud, and then even at the application layer. So it requires an organization to do a thorough inspection of their existing architecture. So from that perspective, zero trust is certainly a driver. We've seen recently additional requests for information coming from GSA with respect to an RFI to the vendor community to look at what capabilities are out there. Our friends at DHS have been driving zero trust pilots for quite some time. So we certainly see zero trust as an area where we are often asked to advise clients in a consultative capacity to help them understand exactly what zero trust is. It's a process, to be quite honest, Luke. It's not a specific technology. It's a capability set that you have to apply at all areas of your business to actually achieve a zero trust environment.
Any other panel members want to comment on that? Neal, I see you look like you're getting ready to say something there.
Just very briefly, thanks, Luke. On zero trust, you know, Ned's right. It's an old concept, but it is getting a lot of new adoption. I think the tricky part in the cloud environment is putting that zero trust principles into effect in a way that they apply consistently across your on-prem capabilities and your workloads in cloud provider A and cloud provider B, et cetera. That's really tough right now because your on-prem stuff and the different cloud providers don't have perfect semantic match on all of these concepts and capabilities.
I'd like to add to that, Luke. Neal, you're exactly correct. We spend the majority of our time helping clients come up with their processes and methodologies to, number one, gain visibility and management and control over these hybrid environments from a centralized console. That is the single biggest challenge. Is there are no vocabulary similarities between cloud service providers. They each describe security models in a slightly different way. There are cloud native security tools, then there are specialized tools, and there's IT management tools across hybrid infrastructure, there's cost management tools. So very easily we can see customers get into what we used to call the technology sprawl concept, just trying to figure out how to manage across these hybrid infrastructures, these clouds.
And this is Dan. I sort of want to reinforce both Ned and Neal's point. It is not, it is not a product. It is not a technology. It is really, a different way of thinking about security from the older models that we opened talking about. And at core, it's about authenticating every interaction between between user and data. Trust is not assumed. So basically, regardless of what network you start from or regardless of what your location is, that's not the basis of your access to applications and data. It's based on the user and the context of their attempts to both use the applications and the data. So at the end of the day, it really is more performance outcome oriented, but there is a risk in this environment where so much branding is put around zero trust that people feel it is just a catalog of tools that they can pick off the shelf and bolt on to an old security approach. And if that is the approach to zero trust, I don't think we'll succeed. The way to get to the future is really focus on outcomes and really continue to ensure that the policies promote this migration from an old security model to one that is more user and
well, that's where I was going to go since we're you've got the floor here. From a policy perspective, is there any policy sort of framework that would help to sort of drive this zero trust concept forward from an understanding and an ability to implement, sort of this concept as we're calling it here?
Yeah, I think we've covered a little bit of it previously. NIST's draft architectures are a way to start to inform the conversation, number one. And then number two, I think the policies, I think should be less prescriptive in terms of specific architectures and more outcome oriented in terms of how organizations perform relative to this notion of getting more user centric and more data centric. So I think again, like I said, I think we're early to mid on that journey in terms of zero trust. Even though the concept's been around for a while, I expect that policy will continue to need to focus on that. And I think the proof again isn't in how many tools you adopt or what specific technologies you buy out of a catalog. It really is, are you actually migrating towards more user-centric and more data-centric controls, more granular controls relative, and are you really breaking a hard break with the past, which again was more perimeter-centric and network and location-centric? I think that's where the proof will be in the pudding. And again, I think we're just starting down that journey, notwithstanding the fact the concept has been around for a long time. I think the challenge will be how people consume it and implement it. If people, again, think it's just pick stuff off the shelf and get enough technologies in place, I don't think that's the answer.
Anybody want to make some bold predictions as to how long it's going to take to implement that? Not even in the federal service, I'd just say in general, right? Let's face it, I don't think that's fully realized or widely adopted across the private industries, I would say.
Yeah, Luke, I'll offer up some relevant real time experience here. So in the past year, I've had about 12 engagements, give or take, with customers across multiple public sector segments. They're all at different stages of maturity of even understanding what zero trust means to form their implementation strategies. And as you can appreciate, as Dan said, there's no one size fits all for a technology piece of this. It truly is. Different organizations have adopted capabilities where they have unique gaps that need to be filled, and how they go about doing that is going to take some time. I don't think this is going to be something that we see out of the public eye in 12 months. I think zero trust will continue to evolve in terms of its definition. And by all accounts, right now there's 1,000 vendors in the marketplace that have a narrative around zero trust. We have guidance from NIST now around zero trust. Gartner has a few different versions of zero trust. There's zero trust, there's CARTA, and there's SASE. IDC has a different version of zero trust, and now GSA is also talking about 6 pillars of zero trust that have to be addressed. So it'll be a topic of conversation for years to come. I think it's in the planning horizon, another 3 to 5 years.
I'll chime in on that again. Gartner's prediction is 2023, 60% of organizations will have adopted zero trust network access. But again, I don't think that's going to be everybody, number one. In terms of Google Cloud, we've built our cloud. If you are fully in our cloud, I think there is a full end-to-end zero trust approach. But again, as we've talked about, the fact is most people are going to be in hybrid multi-cloud environments as opposed to
Bingo.
lifting and shifting everything into one cloud provider. And then again, we're seeing examples of customers as well that are really starting down the path. We're working closely with the Air Force on their enterprise IT as a service. And very closely working with them now to think through, well, what does implementing zero trust mean for you, given what your starting point is, as Ned discussed, how do we augment you from where you are and how do we make that shift?
Yeah, I mean, we have to, we have to meet these agencies where they are, right? I mean, I think it's important to what NIST is doing, what GSA is doing, and laying the policy framework down, but the ability to actually implement something like this and having all the tooling available and the right tooling and et cetera, et cetera. We are going to talk in a minute about skill sets and personnel, et cetera. But I wanted to break for just a minute and encourage the audience to keep firing those questions in, because we would definitely want to take some time to ask some, get some audience participation. Brian, you've been suspiciously quiet over there. And I just wanted to ask a question sort of for the group, but focused towards Brian in respect to, look, let's fast forward, and it's 10 years from now and zero trust is fully realized. We figured it out. We basically got it in place, et cetera, et cetera. What does that mean from sort of the domain that you operate in and the things that you worry about and the things that CISA is focusing their attention on? Can they pack up their bags and go home now because everything's solved, it's all zero trust? Or is, just exactly. So just tell me about, what does it look like when we realize a capability like that? And then what are the things that CISA continues to need to focus their attention on?
Sure, and I think Neal's right about the 10-year time frame. Ned's right about the 3 to 5 year planning time frame. So if I'm suspiciously quiet, it's about sitting back and soaking it in, because these guys are right, and it's rare that we all get together anymore to have these conversations. But I really appreciate y'all having the platform so we can have it for everybody here. What does it mean for CISA if we snap fingers and move our way to a zero trust architecture? If we do it right, it means that the visibility we're talking about is inherent in the tool sets that enable the zero trust architecture. It means that that perfect visibility comes back to the platforms necessary to determine what's actually happening, because the threat's going to evolve too, right? And so, as I started learning about the zero trust implementations and where that was going, I started to resonate with, not only the concept of deperimeterization, but actually that the perimeters start to get really small and bespoke around each, data field. Well, that means that every time someone wants to cross from a layer in the stack to the next one, there's a check, an identity check, a role check, an access check. Those are all automated.
Handoff, a toss off, right? Yeah.
Right. So now you're creating new paths. We can't be so naive to think that the adversary is not going to find a way to keep migrating into that world. So we've got to understand the logging capabilities, the data responsibilities of all that new metadata in a zero trust enabled environment to help us find and root out that adversary at that point in time. I don't think there's a future where we just wipe our hands and zero trust means security solved. It just isn't there. But baking in the visibility concepts, baking in the data planning and the logistics functions necessary to enable my guys' jobs and Neal's guys' jobs to understand what it means to defend these disparate networks with all sorts of different topologies to them. It's a lot of contextual information to plan for and bring back. And that's where my mind goes to. If everybody's better protected, does that make my job harder to verify that they are? Right? And how do I prevent that from being the case? I want to be able to stand shoulder to shoulder with all of our stakeholders when they say, I got zero trust, I feel protected, and I can say, I agree, and here's how I know.
Absolutely, and I would also say that there's not, we don't want anyone to think that, okay, sort of once we're in this sort of zero trust domain, that there's not risk exposure inside that environment. Like I think it was Grant or somebody was talking about, hey, we know how these things happen today, right? Somebody gets a credential hijacked, they're in, they look like a trusted user, they're off to the races, right? We're not going to pretend to think that inside a zero trust sort of fully realized environment, once you're in that bubble and you're sort of fully trusted, that it's all good, right? And I think that's where some of this more sophisticated instrumentation's got to be in place. That's metering out so that you're looking at it, but also at the same time, doing a check and balance. What's normal? Is that right? Behavior analysis, all those other things, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Neal, please.
Yeah, Luke, if I could just kind of foot stomp some of Brian's points there. If we're going to move in this direction, the thing we have to recognize is that infrastructure and workloads that we set up in the clouds are not static, right? So we need tooling, instrumentation, analytics that are similarly dynamic. And you mentioned credential hijacking. Well, if we get really good at, say, multi-factor authentication, that may take that away from the adversaries. They're going to go for a different avenue. How well can most of us today detect misbehavior by one microservice in a containerized, giant mission system because its access tokens or something have been compromised? Those sorts of new attack vectors are ones that we really need common and agile tooling to be able to detect and then to mitigate. Over.
You raised a very good point that, every CIO I talk to wants to be able to dynamically move workload around. And when you're dynamically moving workload around, things get pretty squirrely pretty quickly, right? As far as these environments all of a sudden, get torn down and rebuilt, et cetera, obviously in an automated way, but there's still a lot of, again, at these attack vectors, I think, Brian, you were talking about, that all of a sudden get exposed because you're handing this stuff off, et cetera, in these sort of multi-domain type environments. I'm certain that's got to get trickier as it goes along and actually starts to create a lot of risk. Any thoughts on that from the members? Mr. McAfee, any comments on that?
So yes, we are very concerned about the whole concept specifically related to containers. And by design, as Neal pointed out, they are very portable, as well as their life cycle potentially remains a challenge from a pure governance standpoint. So you think about just cybersecurity auditing alone, where containers can be spawned based on demand of the application, and they can come and go, right? So putting governance models and tools and instrumentation around those capabilities are key to a good cyber hygiene program. We are seeing that as the fastest growing area of our CASB platform, where customers are in the DevSecOps conversation as they're migrating legacy applications to the cloud, and they're talking about security. We were spending a great deal of time in that arena, and we've got some initial set of defenses that allow operators to put some controls in place, but it is certainly a growing field for us to be concerned with. So I echo the concern. Yeah, so we continue to invest in this area, and for the most part, it's new and emerging in terms of threatscape. I think you'll see the vendor industry reacting to these areas pretty quickly.
Dan, when whether it's agencies, commercial, private sector folks, when they're coming to Google and they're saying, hey, yeah, we want to get it in this cloud, but type of thing, what are you typically seeing, as far as the ability to accelerate or the ability to adopt the capability sooner rather than later?
And which, clarifying, the capability, just security in general, or zero trust, or the sort of container?
Just the adoption of moving into the cloud. And I'm sort of riffing off of, I apologize, I should have told you that, one of the poll questions, and it was simply about, the challenges in migrating apps and other functions to the cloud. It was one of the #1 things they want to hear about.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if you look at most of the polls that I've seen, security remains the largest impediment to cloud adoption sort of across the board. I think there's been an evolution in terms of what's driving how people answer that question. I think a couple of years ago, it was probably because people didn't understand the incipient sort of security capabilities in the cloud. I think now people recognize, the cloud, the public cloud can be much more secure because the large hyperscale cloud vendors like us, like AWS, like Microsoft, invest so much money in those environments and really in their commercial clouds and really can bring a lot to bear. I think the challenge when people think about security now, though, is, okay, how do I mix and match what the cloud providers are bringing from a security perspective to what I bring from a security perspective historically? So, with us, with Google, a lot of it is for what you do move into the cloud, you are getting zero trust capabilities, again, for what you have here. And if that's true, though, the complicated piece is still the fact that I have multiple environments that I need to manage. We just talked about containers. I think that's one of the benefits, for example, again, for the work we're doing with DIU, the work there and our Anthos capabilities really provide that multi-cloud solution for running containers, spinning up containers, managing containers, doing policy enforcement, having the control plane to do configuration management of containers, regardless of what environment they are in. So we're getting a lot of traction sort of around multi-cloud management. And again, I think this Defense Innovation Unit engagement can really help prove that out on the security side. But, it's a conversation, again, about what's your security model? How do I mix and match security models? How do I get agreement about responsibility and responsibility matrices between the cloud provider and my sort of on-prem, my enterprise security teams. And then that last bit is the security piece across multiple environments. And then I'm going to hark back to one last thing. The last piece that I think is often still fragmented from a governance perspective, oftentimes it's a rice bowl issue is the ability to integrate all the cyber telemetry from around complex heterogeneous environments into a single place so that you can do analysis on it to find anomalies and to find bad actors and bad actions.
100%. And it's not an all or nothing like the first panel talked about, right? Once you sort of containerize, you can move this capability around into, again, this smart cloud, underlying smart, right? All of a sudden I can put my workload in a data center environment. I can strangle some of it off into another environment, right? And I can fully secure that. It's not an all or nothing type of thing. It's a what's the smartest thing to do as far as computing is concerned? What's the smartest thing to do now that the innovation has gone this way versus that way? I think is really important. And that sort of opens up the aperture to all kinds of capabilities that are available at different price points and different types of, capabilities in regards to the types of computing that one would need.
With that dynamism, though, comes an even increased premium on your ability to have visibility because stuff is constantly shifting and moving. Therefore,
100%.
From a policy perspective, even more capability to make sure you have the visibility because stuff is so much more dynamic. You can't expect to see everything in one place. To do is have the ability to dynamically get visibility.
Right. And you sort of thought about cloud because of consumption-based models, et cetera. And now with this containerization type of capability, all of a sudden you can build, buy, so to speak, that consumption-based kind of capability in lots of different ways. It just opens up an aperture there in regards to different models in respect to acquiring those goods and services. I want to switch over here for a minute. We've got about maybe 10 minutes and change left, and talk about skill sets, personnel, et cetera. The first panel touched on it a little bit, but didn't really get into it. Brian, what are you seeing there? You got all the types of skills you need? Are they lined around the building to come in and fight the good fight? What are you seeing out there, not only in CISA, but in the agencies as you're working with the different agencies, et cetera, and sort of where's the number one area that we need to focus our attention on?
Yeah, for the cloud conversation, the director and I, about a year ago in concert with RSA, had a meeting with several leaders in the cloud community. And at the end, I observed back to them that, why we needed their help in understanding where to go next is that cloud is one of those first computing areas where the government wasn't there first and from the beginning. And we don't do it ourselves, right? At least in the federal civilian side, we're buying it. We did our own data centers, we did our own servers, we did all that coming up through time. But when it came to cloud, right, it was obvious that the commercial offerings back to us was where the value proposition was for the civilian government. And so developing the cloud native mindset of what it means not to lift and shift to the cloud, but to be born in the cloud with new capabilities. That's something where, you know, we can continue to contract out for professional services to help us put our own capabilities on there and be secure. But we also need to start developing those capabilities into the federal engineers and the folks that start to get that support and run those projects so that it's ingrained in the conversation. We're not as reliant, because right now it's more of a one-way street. We're thirsty for it. The market's providing it, but we don't have that native capacity in the federal mindset to think cloud native and move forward. And the other area I would say that skill sets need help in is recognizing this logistics layer underneath all of the analytics that supports, you know, cyber and risk operations. You know, we're a risk advisement agency. We bring in data, we do analysis, we push out insights. The analysts are currently carrying their own load. There needs to be a focus on a cadre of data logisticians, because data is that asset we have to move and pre-position and get ready and clean and access and automate. And it's a whole new series of people that have to be brought into federal service to do that work, to pre-position data for the analysts to go do the mission side. So I think,
and with a fresh set of thinking, right? Again, we're going to follow the innovation, not the technology, and make the correct choices, the timely choices, the smart choices when it comes to how we're going to implement these capabilities to serve our agencies. Chris, do we have any questions out there? I'd love to just get a couple of those in before we close out here. I know we got, what do we have, about, looks like a little bit less than 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Or is it Megan?
No, I'm going to jump in here. We did have a couple questions. One interesting one, and Brian, your timing is perfect. It kind of dovetails with our initial poll question, where people said data and data structuring and management is a big concern. So I think the question is put more as a comment, but I want to put it into a question is, you know, what should we be thinking about in terms of data to optimize how we use cloud and how cloud provides solutions for us in the federal government?
Yeah, the data side, right? So within the CISA construct, you know, I think quite heavily about this. Me and the chief data officer talk about it all the time, and that is, you know, that's our currency in trade. That's what we constantly bring in. It's what our stakeholders expect from us back to them with some value proposition added to it. Data is everything for us, and how we're bringing it in matters, and what we do with it matters, and making that top of mind for the people that are on station right now. And frankly, as a recruiting aspect for those kids that are coming up through college that aren't quite sure what they want to study, cyber's a big place. What do I want to do? You know, we've got to be able to funnel them from that mission mindset where they want to serve to an area where they can. Not everybody's going to be your cyber command line warrior, right? Not everybody's going to be your top line program manager, but there's so much work to do and a real diversity of skill sets necessary for the whole mission to operate. We've got to be able to communicate those opportunities to those pipelines of personnel and say, go get smart in this. We have a place for you to serve the nation and the greater good if you bring that to the table. So I think that's where if I had an extra, you know, money set aside, I'd be putting it in that pipeline to make sure that I don't worry about where my next data analysts are going to come from.
Chris, one last question for the audience, from the audience.
Okay, well, I have a part A and part B, because I personally would like to know from Ned, you know, what how many cloud devices or services are agencies typically using? Most people, as I recall, they said on the question was 25. And then there was a question about, are there best practices that we should, you know, we could be talking about today to better educate the listeners out there?
So the answer is closer to 2,000, by the way. It's pretty interesting when we go in and do cloud security audits for clients. The typical guesses are anywhere from 35 to 100 or so. But when we actually do the audits, we typically find 1,900 to 2,000 plus actual cloud services that are being used across organizations. And that's across the board. That's not any particular segment or vertical. So there's your answer.
There you go. Surprisingly. Okay, we're going to go round robin here. Final takeaway. What's the punchline? Let's start with you, Neal.
So, I mean, a key topic in this conversation was remaining risks, which sort of implies that we have our act together, and I'm not sure that's true. But some of the things I think are most important for folks to be thinking about as they go out securing what's sure to be a hybrid cloud structure within their agencies. First is, like the poll question asked, think about your data, right? Have consistent semantic policies on what it means to mark your data and control it. Second, ensure that you've got monitoring infrastructure that isn't only for infrastructure as a service or only for software as a service, that it's an infrastructure that can span all of those. Third, I'll talk about the notion of binding. I think this is a bit of a sleeper notion. We're going to have so many different types of entities within these environments: on-prem users, remote users, machines that are acting like users, microservices, containers. How do you bind the identity of all those different types of entities to the actions they perform and the data that they create, so that you can have a holistic picture of what's going on in your environment and have a hope of analyzing it, as Brian said earlier.
Yeah, I think that's what gets us to that 2000 number, right? It's machine talking to machine there in a lot of cases. Dan, punchline.
I want to close on two thoughts. One, around data. What we found in our engagements is that the long pole in the tent around data isn't the technology at all. It is really the data governance issues and the politics and sort of rice bowls around data at the customer itself. So in order to effectively use cloud capabilities, for example, in machine learning or analytics or AI, the customer really has to be very introspective and get their hands around their data governance issues in order to properly leverage the data and leverage the power that the cloud can provide, for example, on analytics, ML, and AI. That's the first point. I think the second point, when it comes to human capital, regardless of the needs that any customer has, and particularly the federal government, no one is going to be able to hire their way out of the problem. There's a global secular shortage of security professionals. There's a global secular shortage of analytics and AI ML professionals. So what I think is really important when you look at cloud providers is, what security functions can I allow my cloud provider to provide, whether it's multi-factor authentication or data loss prevention or encryption, in order to take things off my plate. Most security teams are completely overwhelmed. There's alert fatigue. They're drowning in data without the ability to make sense of it all and have end-to-end visibility. So what can I do to take things off the plate of cyber professionals? What can I do to potentially turn off existing cyber tools? Most large enterprises have more than 150 cybersecurity tools installed. What can I do in tandem and in partnership with my cloud provider to simplify what I have to do by allowing the cloud provider to bring some of those native security capabilities to bear, so that I can be more effective and give time back to my human capital and my professionals to have them move up the value curve, as opposed to continuing to try to implement roll their own encryption products or roll their own multi-factor authentication, for example.
Or staple it all together, right? Brian, final thoughts, punchline.
Dan's right. We can't hire our way out of this problem. You know, there's a lot of other opportunities are opened up by getting some of these foundations right, like data management and governance. That opens up your opportunities for automation and shifting the workload off the people to the machines that we're spending so much time talking about buying in the first place. But for hiring, CISA.gov/careers.
Yep.
If anything about this interests you, go check the site out. Look to become a citizen. We're looking to add to our ranks. We've got a compelling mission. If anything here that I've said makes sense and you want to help, or doesn't make sense and you want to tell me and you want to do it in a helpful way, go to that site. Come join us.
And I tell everyone, I'll tell them out on the wire right now, that if you haven't tried public service, give it a shot, because it tastes great. Ned, take us home.
Thanks, Luke. A couple of thoughts for the audience today. I'll get a little tactical here around data protection and theme it back into zero trust and hybrid clouds. Conditional and contextual access to data from managed and unmanaged assets is critical to really fully realize the benefits of the collaboration across teams that organizations are looking to accomplish. And that applies internally as well as to the supply chain. So again, very data centric here. Data protection strategies, a unified policy enforcement capability from device to cloud is a key element that we're recommending. And then continuous monitoring of user behavior, which typically gives you pretty early indications that you may have a situation where, as we talked about, hijacked account or account compromises or possible insider threats.
It's always a multi-layer type of play here to
Yep.
protect these environments. All right, fantastic panel, great conversation. Chris, I'm going to throw it back over to you.
Hey, thanks, Luke, and thanks to our panelists today. Great job, guys. Super job. Thank you very much.